Welcome to the Jacksonville Jaguars Daily Fantasy Team Preview. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Russell Clay, taking a look at the Jaguars and what's in store for the upcoming season. And after 2015, a pretty friendly fantasy offense. Obviously, Allen Robinson was such a big part of that wide receiver core up top. But you also had Bortles, who just was kind of that guy who just consistently threw for a ton of yards. And while he's not a good quarterback, he was a good fantasy quarterback.
Well, you know what? I wouldn't say he's not bad. I think we can confirm after last year that he's not bad, which is more than we can say about, I'd say, at least half the quarterbacks in the NFL. But in terms of that, yeah, the Jaguars were losing a lot of games last year, but in a positive sense for fantasy, there's bad teams that are just bad and no fantasy relevant guys can be good. And then there's bad teams that are like them or the Chargers where by the late second quarter, they're down 20 points and they're throwing the entire game. So they obviously had a good game flow situation for their receiving game in 2015. And while I think they're slightly improved this year, I think it's going to be more of the same. A lot of shootouts, a lot of Blake Bortles throwing 30, 40, 45 times a game, and hopefully using them in tournaments and hitting some big wins with Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns again.
Yeah, definitely. You look at this offense, it was a pretty friendly passing attack, averaged 2.2 passing touchdowns per game last year, which ranked fifth in the league. He has a ton of weapons around him. Obviously, Robinson is the top one, but you also have Allen Hurns, who's a solid wide receiver too. Julius Thomas, when he's healthy, is one of the better tight ends in the league. Also, their defense is improving. I'm not quite sure they're going to be there yet, but they are something that's going to be, I think, a dominant threat in the future, but not quite yet this season. So I still think game flow is going to be relatively similar.
Right. They get a lot of young guys that are supposed to be the prominent players in their defense. Dante Fowler from 2 years ago obviously had that major injury. From all reports, he sounds like he's doing amazing so far. So that would be nice for their pass rush. And as for Jalen Ramsey, their top 5 pick this year, he's supposedly going to be the next big sort of secondary piece in the league. So those are 2 huge pieces, but like you mentioned, probably a year away from making those true impacts that you expect from Pro Bowl caliber players.
Yeah, definitely. You look at this team, they play in a pretty weak division. They're going to have a couple of tough opponents, but overall,
a truffle of
opponents. You couldn't just let that slip for me.
There were a lot of fun words that I wanted to say in there. Truffle shuffle, buffle. I don't know. I just liked where you were going with that, and I was hoping we could just end the show just saying a bunch of those words.
They have a pretty solid strength of schedule. It's nothing too crazy. Obviously playing an average Indy defense, bad Tennessee defense. Houston defense is obviously, I think, still perceived as one of the top ones, but they're certainly beatable. So I'm okay with their in-division games, and they don't really have anything tough outside of that. They are going to play a lot of good offenses, so I'm kind of expecting, as we said earlier, those shootouts are certainly going to be there.
Right. I think in at least one of those 2 Colts games, it's just going to be an absolute battle of offenses where each team scores at least 30. I just see that happening this year. Okay, and we got to have a quick conversation about what regression is and how to properly apply this to this Jaguars team, because we look at Blake Bortles. He threw 35 touchdowns last year. Look at Allen Robinson. He got 14 touchdowns last year. Are those things going to happen again? No. Probably, most likely, almost assuredly not. But, they're still good. For fantasy purposes, I still see Bortles throwing around 30 touchdowns, as Jason mentioned. Strength of schedule is still pretty reasonable. There are going to be a lot of shootout games. So, while Allen Robinson and Blake Bortles will regress, in air quotes, off their numbers, they're still really good players, So even if Allen Robinson ends up with 12 or 1,300 yards, 10 to 12 touchdowns, he's still going to be an every week guy, and he's still going to be very exploitable in cash, in tournaments, however we were using him in 2015. So I mean, Alan Hearns was kind of always a tournament guy either way, but I mean, I still see him in the same light as I do the 2015 Alan Hearns.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm in agreement that there is some regression coming, but it's going to be to a point where they're still good,
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
the biggest thing to take away from it is they're still going to be a top passing volume team, and we can kind of transition into the running game, which is obviously something to talk about, just given the fact that they, added Chris Ivory to an already backfield with T.J. Yeldon, so that's something that kind of clogs thing up a little bit. I know you don't really mind Yeldon still. You think he's going to be a solid guy. Just curious to see in a week-to-week basis, it's still going to be one to kind of pick your spots with this Jags, running game because it's not going to be the most consistent.
Right, and well, the big thing with the regression for the passing game is that there's probably going to be a few more rushing touchdowns this year. They only had 5 total last year, and 2 of them were from Blake Bortles. So it's kind of like, yes, that's going to average out in some way, especially with Chris Ivory in town. And I don't mind Yeldon, especially where sort of he's being valued right now, at least in redraft leagues, but especially in DFS leagues, because his price is going to be really reduced with another running back there. Now, I think Chris Ivory is going to get most of the goal line carries, but I do see Yeldon sort of shifting into a nice little third down role to where we kind of look at him as a bigger power back. I could see him definitely accumulating quite a few receptions on third down, and especially in those games where they get blown out, I just see Ivory sort of sitting on the sideline and Yeldon taking over the majority of those receiving, shotgun, and third down snaps. So especially if an injury happens, to Yeldon, I'm going to be on Ivory. It kind of goes either way. Whoever benefits from the other getting injured, I'm going to be in on, especially for DFS. As far as if both of them are healthy, that's going to be tournament gambles that will never be in cash for me.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I can never see myself using this backfield. Just one, because of the game flow situation that Jacksonville's going to find themselves in, but also just due to the fact that they are going to be splitting a bulk of the load of an already pretty minor load as it is. So, I definitely like Ivory. I'm a big fan of his. Obviously, he's not going to be that guy that he was with the Jets. I think he definitely takes a step backwards because Ivory was a cash game back at times last year in good matchups because he did, when he was healthy, got that full workload. A little bit different situation here. I think it's just going to be pretty split in one to kind of avoid on most weeks.
Yeah, agreed. Going to be an avoid, unfortunately.
So, and we talked about that defense and then possibly kind of gaining some steam. I think they are going to be kind of closer to maybe a middle-of-the-road defense this year if everything kind of comes together. It's not going to be quite the easy pick on the Jags and kind of watch everyone go to town. I think there's going to be a little bit of a struggle for some teams, especially those teams that are average. You're not just going to be able to throw any average team against the Jags.
Totally agree. We see this a lot with sort of teams that have some really good players but also have some really big weaknesses, sort of like the Rams the last few years where they have weeks where they just go off because they have some amazing players that week they got open or, got that interception and returned it for a touchdown, or Aaron Donald was just couldn't be stopped. But, I mean, yeah, I agree. That's kind of what the Jaguars are looking like this year. They still have a lot of weaknesses, but they're going to have those weeks where they just randomly shut down teams, and it's something to be at least aware of, going into the season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm excited. I think this team's pretty young, and there's a lot of potential there. I'm just kind of overall excited to see where they head in the next few years. I think there's just a good, pretty solid core, especially on the offensive side and with some of the draft picks they've had on defensive late.
And I guess I should address the third wide receiver spot because they did do a lot of 3 wide receiver sets last year. They didn't necessarily target that third receiver that much, but it's between Rashad Green and Marquise Lee. Now, I love Marquise Lee coming out. Second-round pick. I mean, super productive in college, pretty athletic for a slot receiver type prospect. Just hasn't been able to stay on the field, has dealt with multiple hamstring injuries, multiple ankle injuries. It's just been a mess to start his career. So if he can get healthy and stay on the field, especially if there's an injury to Hearns or Robinson, he's someone to keep an eye on for DFS. But if he can't, I mean, Rashad Green kind of shifts into that third receiver, fourth receiving option in the offense, and I could see him having some big weeks if anyone were to go down.
Yeah, certainly. And the same thing kind of goes if Thomas goes down, if he's not able to get healthy and stay healthy. You're definitely going to see a lot more of those 3 wide receiver sets there. So
absolutely.
That's going to wrap it up with our Jaguars DFS team preview. Be sure to check out the rest of the teams at dailyfantasycafe.com.